Hey, content disruptors, it's Whitney B from Speakerazi, and I want to thank you for joining the 2020 Content Marketing Review. This is truly an opportunity for us to get to know some of the things that we did in 2020, to understand how we can take some of these things that we've done and take them into 2021. So it was really just a lens of what worked, what didn't work, what we could be working on, and just looking at some of the things that have emerged in 2020 that might be advantageous for next year. One of the things that I wanted to start off with, you guys, is making sure that you did get the content review. So there's a 2020 content review. So if you're on the email list, there was an email sent out earlier this week, and there was one also sent out earlier this morning. So if you want to check that out, the review was there. We're going to go over the first 10 questions in that review because it's a 30 question review. And I think the first 10 questions are the most pertinent. But I want to kick things off by just saying hello to everyone. I see that we have a few people who are in the broadcast. What's up with you all? And I just want to ask a quick question. So for those of you who are watching the broadcast, tell me, from a scale of 1 to 10, how has your content marketing efforts been? So 10 on the scale of, this year's been really good for my content, and 1 to no, it hasn't really been that great. So I just wanted to kind of see an idea and just kind of assess where you guys are from a scale of 1 to 10. Hey, Monique. Hey, Facebook user. I don't know who you are because you're not using the StreamYard platform, but I just wanted to say what's up. So while you guys are answering that, from a scale of 1 to 10, how has content been for you this year? 1, not so great. 10, excellent. I blew it out the water. Just curious to hear what your thoughts are. So as you guys are sharing that, and as we're doing the poll, I want to talk just a little bit about content marketing trends. So every year, there always seems to be a shift, right? What worked last year doesn't always necessarily work into the new year. And sometimes things do work, but they evolve. So I want to talk about some of the things that I think are going to be most important going into next year. This year, we've seen an emergence of a lot of different new platforms, or we've seen platforms that have been existing and they've added new features. So for example, with Instagram, we saw Instagram Reels, which is, kind of like the cousin of TikTok, right? Now we have things like Clubhouse, where it's an audio-based platform and people are having micro conversations inside of the room. So one of the things that I think is most important to note, that when it comes to content marketing in 2021, we're going to see a lot more double conversations. We're going to see a lot more two-way conversations. It's not going to be me talking at people specifically, but people are going to want to be a part of those platforms. They're going to want to share their voice in more controlled environments. We even saw that with Facebook this year when they introduced Facebook Rooms. So I think one of the things that we have to thinking about is how can we take personalization of our content to a different level. So if we're curating content, if we're curating conversations with people who are within our tribe or people who are following us, what platforms are going to best allow us to have those curated conversations so we can truly get to know what they do. So one of the things that I love about Clubhouse, I joined Clubhouse maybe a month ago now, and, I've been really just observing. One of the things that I really encourage people to do is to become an early adopter, to make sure that you're understanding how platforms work. Sometimes platforms don't jump like, most of us are just hearing about Clubhouse now, but Clubhouse has been around since early spring of this year. So, for those who were those early adopters, they had an opportunity to see how it worked and evolve with the platform. So that's something I definitely recommend that you do if you have not started to do. But one of the things that I love about Clubhouse is it's a great hub for information. So even if you're not the person who's on the forefront of the stage, if you're not talking about specific things, it will give you an opportunity to listen to what other people are thinking. So you might have access to opinions that people may not have shared on Facebook. They might not have shared on Instagram or some of the other platforms. This is direct access into your customer base to understand what are their unique thoughts. So I want you to kind of take that as an opportunity to think about how you can start to leverage some of those things. The other thing that I think is going to be really important going into 2021 is the short form video content. Short form video content is really taking off this year, and I think that's a trend that's not going anywhere. So if you haven't learned how to be more brief inside of your videos, I think really taking the time to understand the dynamic of what make things like TikTok and IG Reels tick, I think that's going to be very significant for you. It reminds me of when Vine was a thing years ago, like back in like the early, 2013. Vine was a huge thing when people were doing those 6-second videos. Right now, we're all vying for attention. So the shorter the video, the better. So this really think about how can you take a complex idea or a concept in your industry and how can you put it into a video that's easily digestible for people to see. The other thing that I think is really important is thinking about social messaging. So this is not the time to hide behind your brand. I think it's really important to understand that people want to know where companies stand with certain things. Like we're living in an age where social justice is at the forefront. People are caring more about how companies think because they want to make sure that your values are in alignment with their values as well. So really start to think about what is your company's position on certain things? What kind of values do you have? What are the things that you want to articulate to the public on your social media feeds or on your website and just in the content that you do so they can have context of who you are as a company. You would think, oh, well, I'm a small business, I'm not like P&G or one of those other bigger companies. But on the contrary, people are watching. They want to understand who you are because they identify with what resonates with them and their personal values. The other thing that's really going to be big, and this is especially for people who have e-commerce stores, so social shopping is going to be really important. So if you haven't already started to integrate, your shop with Instagram or Facebook and the tools that they're providing for us, I think it's really important to start thinking about how do you start to create that integrated social shopping experience. People want to be able to click on something and be able to buy it from social media. And again, platforms like Facebook and Instagram, all of them want you to keep people on the platform as much as you can. So really think about how you can kind of cultivate that as well. The other thing that I think is really important, and this is just for people who are in bigger companies. So if you are a part of a bigger company, one of the things that we're going to start seeing is more internal influencers, placing the CEO or placing, people who are vice presidents. You're going to see a lot more of that in 2021. People have already started to do it, but there's going to be a lot of urgency for that. And the reason being is because at the end of the day, when people connect with the brand, they want to connect with human. They want to have a human interaction and a human connection with you. So I think it's really important that as a small business owner, you have to think of your personal brand as an extension of your business brand. People are going to want to understand who you are. It's no different than, we look at Jeff Bezos from Amazon or Mark Zuckerberg. Those are the individuals that we look at. We tie their personal brand to the company brand. So it's no different for you as well. And then I think the other thing that's going to be really interesting is that content doesn't have to be perfect all the time. Like I think that's something that's really going to be a trend moving forward. I know with Instagram, we kind of saw like, oh, all this aesthetics has to look great. Now, granted, yes, you should brand yourself. Your color should be the same, font should be the same, but it doesn't need to look perfect. Like I think people are looking for people who are more authentic and relatable. So I think, as you're thinking about curating your feeds, don't overthink it. And I think that's a big problem that we have, especially as small business content creators. We overthink it. We think it has to look and do a certain thing when sometimes, those imperfect moments can give you the best results. So those are just kind of some of the things that I'm thinking about right now as far as like online courses. I definitely think for those of you who are service providers, many of you guys are speakers, and we've had to transition from in-person events to digital events. So everyone's zoomed out. I'm so over it, but it's going to be really important next year to figure out how do you create an experience that doesn't show the typical Zoom experience. How do you create an online environment that really fosters some excitement and something that's different? I recently did a moderation for a conference last week, and I love the platform. It was a platform called Hop In, and like they had these digital rooms. So like when you have a vendor room and you're able to see all the different vendors and talk and communicate with them, they actually had a digital vendor room where you could go in, you can look at the different vendors, you can watch their videos. They had people on site to ask you questions. It was really an amazing opportunity to connect, and I thought that was a unique way of still highlighting vendors and still getting them involved. So really think about how do you make these digital experiences different, because they're not going anywhere for a while, given the current pandemic. So you want to think about how can these experiences be more interactive and not like the norm. The other thing that I think is going to be really important in terms of a trend is more online courses. So everyone's going to want to know more. there's going to be a big opportunity to teach. So if you haven't thought about creating online courses, I think online courses is going to be something that's going to truly dominate in 2021. More people are going to be looking for more information. And, if you're the type that's able to execute that information, it's going to be great. This is going to be a great way to create passive income in 2021. The other thing that's really important, and this is the last thing I promise, and then we'll get right into the review, is just having a mobile first mentality. So I know, if we hadn't already been on the internet before, and if we're coming onto the internet now, I think mobile is important. And the reason I say mobile is important is because sites like Google, they index mobile version of your website first. So if you are, prioritizing your website, it gives you an opportunity to be seen in terms of SEO. So people are relying on their phones to get more information. So you want to think about, how do you create that better mobile experience for people to get to you? That's one of the things that I'm looking at on my website. How can I optimize my website so when people are visiting on their phone, it ultimately creates a better experience? So I wanted to share some of those things with you guys because, thinking forward into 2021, I think these are some of the things that I saw this year, and they're kind of going to spill over into next year. So I wanted to kind of put that on your minds and your hearts as we're thinking about how to plan out our content. So I see for many of you, I'm looking at our poll, most of you were in the 5s and 6s. So many of you thought you did pretty okay. You did pretty average for content marketing in 2020. So we'll talk about what that is going to look like. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to share my screen, and I'm going to share the document that we talked about. So this is the 2020 content review. And this review is really important because I think as a business owner, we look back at everything. We might look at our goals for the year, but we should also do the same thing with our content, because it's important to see what worked and, what can be salvaged and what can be repurposed and reused. You guys, those of you who know me know that that's something I'm really big about. So when it comes to this review, I want you to take some time. So we're only going to spend a short amount of time together today, but when you actually sit down and do this review, it should take you about 2 hours to do. And it's really a deep dive into what your content is supposed to look like. Now, with the review, you want to do this on a quarterly basis. Like we're doing this right now, and I geared this towards the new year overall, but you should always be doing this on a quarterly basis. And when you're looking at your review, a couple of things you want to make sure you have access to. So you want to be able to look at your social media analytics. You want to look at Google Analytics if you have it. You want to look at any bank statements that you have, because one of the questions is about looking at tools and software that you purchase. Any ad analytics performance. So if you're running Facebook or Instagram ads, I want you to be able to look at that as well. Any email automation systems, any customer relationship management systems. So things like Dubsado, for example. And then think about, your payment processing systems like PayPal, Stripe, Square. So you can look at your sales, because I know that they break those things down for you. So I wanted to just kind of give you an idea of what was expected as we go through this. You may not need all of it right now in this moment, but when you take the time to individually go through this, these are some of the things that are expected. So without further ado, I want to get started and hop into the review. So with the content review, the first question that I have for you guys is, what type of content did you create in 2021? This is a simple question, but it's also a very important question. We've created so many things, right? We create social media posts. Some of us might have did blog posts, guest blog posts. We might have appeared on other podcasts. We might have did YouTube videos, reels, infographics, created Facebook groups, did an online challenge. I want you to think about every single thing that you made this year. And it's important to think about things that you made for free. So whether they were a lead magnet or something that you just did to create more visibility, and also things that you created in terms of actually charging for it, things that people actually paid you for. So I want you to think about all of the content that you created in 2020, because it's important, because once you create an actual list of everything that you've created, you'll be easily able to identify, okay, I made a ton of videos, but maybe video wasn't my thing, but more people came to my blog because I embedded my podcast inside of a blog post. So think about all of the different things that you created this year and put that into an itemized list. The next thing that's really important is to think about what is your biggest win. So, what is the biggest content win for 2020? So, in other words, what worked? So, what strategy, what type of content, or what type of campaign did you execute that brought you big results? And then I want you to think about why did it bring you results, right? What did you do differently that you've done in the past that made this work before? Or, why is this something that continues to work well for your brand? So, a big content win could literally be a shift, right? Maybe you shift from doing videos to doing podcasting because that resonated more with your audience. Maybe you've identified your target audience. Maybe it was something that you thought it was before and now it's something that's different. Maybe you gave yourself a longer runway for a campaign. So instead of marketing something for 30 days, maybe you're giving yourself 60 days and you found that gave you a greater return on investment. So think about what are those specific wins that you did in 2020, and how did it work for your content? The other thing that's really important is thinking about what is your lesson. So my philosophy is if you learn a lesson, there are no losses. So what did you learn about creating, distributing, and amplifying your content this year? So I'll give you guys an example of one of my biggest lessons. So a big lesson that I had this year was earlier last month, I did an online challenge, right? So I did an online challenge for the podcast playbook challenge. I think the challenge went great. I had really great participation. A lot of people signed up. But what I learned is that the offer that I had for that particular challenge didn't align with what my audience wanted. In my head, I'm like, oh, everybody wants a class. But in reality, many people reached out to me one-on-one to say, hey, Whit, I want to work with you one-on-one to talk about podcasting strategy. They didn't necessarily want a class. They wanted someone to hold their hand and to talk through the strategy of their specific podcast. So that was one of the big lessons that I've learned. I was very focused on creating an experience, but I didn't really think about the end product. I didn't really realize or recognize that what my audience wasn't in line with what I thought that they needed. So I think for me, my biggest lesson was just making sure that you're asking and figuring out what is the best way to execute whatever solution that person wants, whether that's a class, whether that's a strategy session, whether that's a course, whether that's a book. You have to really think about what is best for where people are in that moment. So, take an opportunity to think about your most significant content lessons of 2020. Another question that is really important is what new social media features or platforms did you adopt this year and how did they work for you? So I always say that social media is constantly changing. We know that. How did you keep up? How did you keep up with those changes this year? Like, did you adapt and incorporate it into your strategy, or did you just ignore them and keep doing the same things that you were doing? So for me, for example, for my podcast, Pink Lemonade Podcast, I did a ton of reels this year. At least it's a ton for me. I did reels because I recognized that video content was picking up steam faster than IGTV or me just posting in my feed. And so I started to do reels. So again, I observe first. I see what's trending, how it's done. I get familiar with the features, and then I started to execute my own reels. And so with reels, I found that the views that I did was exponentially higher than when I was just posting in my feed or posting it on IG stories. And so I'm like, okay, reels is something that needs to be a part of my content strategy. This is how my audience likes to consume things that I have to share with them. And from those reels, it brought traffic back to my bio, the link in my bio, people clicking through to the site. And every time that I posted a reel, I would get about 20 to 30 new followers just from one reel. So think about the social media features or platforms that came out this year and just figure out how did they work for you. And if they didn't work for you, or if you didn't implement them in your business, why didn't you do that? Is it because you lack time? Is it because you lack the knowledge? And if those are the things that are keeping you from actually implementing those features, what are the things that you plan to do in 2021 to ensure that you actually are able to keep up with those features? And one tidbit. So one of the ways that I keep up with new changes, I subscribe to the Social Media Examiner and Social Media Today. Those are two credible media sources that cover all things social media. And a lot of times they tell you about updates before they happen. So I knew about Instagram Reels maybe like 2 or 3 weeks before it actually hit my Instagram account. I think following those things can really make you savvy as a business owner, because you kind of know where the trends are going and what to expect. So I definitely would recommend subscribing or to look at those particular websites, because they give you a lot of insight. And sometimes like companies like Facebook and Instagram, they get with those companies and give them a first look. So they're able to test platform features before it's even released to the public. So just a quick tidbit to make sure that you're actually going and you're getting an opportunity to understand how these things may work before it just kind of rushes up on you in your timeline and you didn't know that you had to expect it. Now, the other thing that I think is really important is think about what kind of lead magnets did you create to increase your website traffic, email subscriptions, or lead generation. So a lead magnet is essentially what type of valuable offer did you create, like an ebook, a checklist, a guide, a class. What did you create in exchange for collecting contact information from your prospective client or customer? So lead magnets are something that's supposed to develop trust with your clients. And when you provide a valuable lead magnet, it pretty much allows them to get to know you, and it helps them convert to things that you want them to buy eventually. So think about the type of lead magnets that you created. So for me, my lead magnets for Speakerazi this year, I did 2 challenges. I spoke on a lot of different platforms for virtual conferences. And what I would do at each conference is I would make sure that I had some sort of download that went with my talk for that particular conference or for that event. So that way I could capture the information of the individuals who were watching me at the time. So think about the type of lead magnets that you created in 2020 and what did you do to promote them? Were they effective in helping you increase your website traffic, your email subscribers, or leads of people who are actually buying your business? Why or why not? And I say that because sometimes all lead magnets aren't created equal. Sometimes we create things that people don't want. So it kind of goes back against that philosophy of making sure that you understand the need that people want before you start to create these things, so that way it really is a true value for someone else. The other thing that I think is important is thinking about what type of content led to more sales. So can you pinpoint the specific types of content that you created this year helped you generate more sales in your business? For me, user generated content generated more sales in my business. So anytime that someone publicly recommended me, publicly shared or tagged me and saying that I contributed or I created something for them, that is what ultimately brought me back more sales. Yes, it's good I promote my own content, but it's something different. It hits different when someone else is giving you a word of mouth recommendation. It makes people trust more and it keeps you at the top of mind. So I want you to look at your website, your social media, your emails, and look at what pieces of content led people to buy more, to take more action. So on social media, you can see the amount of people who clicked on a particular post. On your email, who clicked through to actually buy, and how many of those click-throughs actually converted to a sale. So think about what are those pieces, and then with those pieces, can they be used again? Can you use those content pieces again, or can you create a template for it so when you have another offer, you can use that same thing again because it has worked in the past? Another thing that is important is your content distribution strategy. I did not create this saying, but y'all know the old song "Cream," cash rules everything around me. There's a gentleman, can't think of his name, but he said, "Dream, distribution runs everything around me." I love that philosophy because a lot of times when we create things, like, I just want y'all to keep it real with yourselves. How many times have you promoted a piece of content a couple of times and then you just never promote it again? You move on to the next thing. Unless your content is something that's time sensitive or it's in an industry where stuff changes all the time, like the tech industry or healthcare, content, if it's evergreen, it never expires. It should be something that you distribute regularly over time. So content distribution is really just thinking about the types of ways that you're distributing, right? So we have owned content. So this is through our emails and our websites. We have earned content. So this is when we're featured in a podcast, when we're written about in Forbes. Then you have your paid content, which are like Facebook, Instagram, or Google ads. And then think about repurposing your content. So how do you take one piece of content and make it into multiple formats? So look at your website, your social media, and your email to think about how often you distributed content. Like, is it something that you keep as a part of your mix? And if you have a mix of all the types of content, write down what your strategy was for it. How did you execute that, and did it actually work for you? So for me, anytime that I create a podcast, I'm automatically creating about 10 different types of content pieces, and I literally promote that podcast throughout the year. So something that I published back in January, you'll probably still see in November, because I think it's important to make sure that people are still seeing it. Because what you have to understand about social feeds is that just because you post something one time doesn't mean that all of your audience sees it. So if let's say I had 100 followers and I post something one time, all 100 of my followers are not going to see that particular piece of content. It might be 10 people who see it at that particular point in time. You want to make sure that you're still constantly distributing it, because A, you might reach the people that you didn't reach before, and B, you're always getting new people who are following you. So you really want to make sure that that process is down pat and on lock. The next thing, what is one area of the content creation process where you feel all over the place, disorganized, or inconsistent? So there's a couple of different things. Like for me, I typically overthink a lot of things, believe it or not. When I create these challenges and things, it takes me a while to really conceive them in my head before I actually execute it. There are some people who just go, but overthinking has been a process for me. So that's one area that I want to change, because I know that there is an opportunity to do more. And sometimes when you sit on things, someone else is the first to market to get it out there. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do it. So think about, what is your vices of 2020? What are the things that stopped you from creating at the level that you wanted to create? Like I said, many of you indicated that you were at a 5 or a 6. So how do we get that 5 to a 6 to a 7, 8, or 9? Like, what are the type of habits do we need to create in order for us to create more consistently and at the level that we want to? And then this is a interesting question. What course, ebook, masterclass is currently collecting dust that you need to visit in the next 90 days? I am very guilty of buying things and not putting them to use or not revisiting them. So don't just download another freebie or a masterclass. I want you to really think about how you can go back to your courses or ebooks and really figure out, what did you learn? Because there might be things that you did complete this year. So if you did complete a course, ebook, or masterclass, go back and review your notes and see what is the things that you've learned that could be applicable for 2021. So, I really want you to give yourself an opportunity to list out all of the information products that you've purchased. And this is really a challenge to you to put it on your date of when to start, complete, or review those items. So that way, next year you're not trying to go back and review things that, you could look at in this moment. I know many of us right now, it's the holiday season. Some of us are winding down. So, if this is not a time where, you're completely on vacation or relaxing, this is a great time to review some of those documents and things that you've purchased in the past. And finally, what are 3 immediate actions that you will take before January 1st to improve your content marketing strategy? So think about 3 different actions that you can take to start your content marketing ever strong. So, you might want to get a new marketing tool. You might need to schedule a photo shoot. You might create a content calendar. Whatever it is that you need to do, what are things that you can do to start now? So like, for example, for me, one of the things that was on my list earlier this week was to meet with my system strategist. She's someone who helps me create my systems, it helps me organize these things of what I'm going to do. We had the meeting and now we have a solid strategy. One of the other things that I plan to do is to complete some of the lead magnets that I've created. So I had lead magnets that I started back in May, never finished them. So now I'm working with one of my VAs, and she's helping me get my email funnel together. So that way that is ready to go for 2021. And then also adding my new services to my website. So in the midst of me, working with others to kind of refine what it is that I do, now those things need to be reflected on my website. So when people are looking and searching for the things that I do, or if they come across a piece of my content, they'll have all the information available when everything rolls out in 2021. So just think about those specific actions that you're going to take to improve your content marketing strategy. And when you do it, I encourage you to create SMART goals. So be very specific and intentional, and make sure that you're putting a date next to it. And then, if you want to go even more in depth, write down the steps for each action. So that's actually one of the things that I did. So for my services, I have a spreadsheet, and I literally am breaking down every single step that it takes to complete a specific service, because one of my big goals next year is to outsource more. I started to do a little bit this year, and I fell in love with it. And so now I see an opportunity to outsource more. So with outsourcing, I have an opportunity to say, okay, this is my service right here. This is my process. This is how many hours it takes to complete each step of the process. How many hours do I want to be a part of this particular process for this service, and then who can ultimately pick up the pieces for the places that I don't want to put myself in, so I can be more of the CEO of my business. So, just really think about those specific steps. When you break things down into specific steps, it makes it a lot less overwhelming. So I know I talked a lot. There are quite a few of you guys on here, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. This session is truly for you guys. So if you have any questions about how you can look at your content, how you can reflect, what things you could potentially do differently, I definitely encourage you to put them in the comments below. I wanted to go over the top 10 questions because these are just kind of the questions to get your mind into that mode, to get you to start thinking. If you go down in the document, there are bonus reflection questions. So there's about 20 other questions, and these questions are very specific. So this is where you need your Google Analytics and your bank statements and to look at certain stuff, right? It's really requiring you to think a little bit more deeply of how you're executing your content and how you need to support your business goals. So I'm not going through all of these, but I just want you to know that, for those, I said this is for the overachievers. So if you are an overachiever and if you want to ask more questions to yourself, and give yourself a more complete look of your content, these questions will all support you. So I wanted to share this with you guys. I wanted to give you this review because I think, again, it is so important for us to really recognize how content plays a role in our business. Most businesses are literally doing content marketing as a way of survival. That is how people build a relationship with you. That's literally someone's first step to you. So, thinking about your content should really just be an ongoing process. Make sure that you're doing this every quarter, and just ultimately know that content is subjected to change. It's not always going to be the same. And that's the one thing I would say taking into 2021. Don't assume that things will always remain the same. We learned that just within this global pandemic, and it's the same with content. Everything's changing rapidly. Things are changing quickly, and people, their interests and their attitudes, their opinions, all of those things are changing over time. So you want to make sure that you're in tune enough and you're connected enough to know where those changes are occurring and how you can pivot with those changes. So I thank you all for joining. I don't see any questions from anyone. So if there are no questions, I'm going to hop off. If you do have any questions, if you happen to watch this during the replay, feel free to ask the question below and tag me. I will answer any questions that you all have. But most importantly, really make sure that you go through this exercise. I do think it can be a game changer for your content marketing efforts in 2021. And I hope that you all have an amazing Saturday, and I will see you soon. Peace.